two things, and I want you to debate me if you think I'm wrong, but obviously I cut my teeth, so to speak, as a very young lieutenant on the air-land battle, the whole thing with the FIBA flot,
Right.
Fulda Gap, all that stuff. And so one of the things I learned, both as a student of the Cold War, being someone who had to, understand how to do intelligence assessments and figure out what, if anything, the Red Army was going to do, was that logistics and preparations in the rear area were always key to understand what the Soviets were going to do or not do. That is to say, Pete, we always knew that if they were going to come across, you're going to have mass of armies because we had masses of armies. So there's no indication, based on the fact that the Russians are moving literally at yards per week, yards, not kilometers, yards per week, and they may get a kilometer in a month. That's how slow this is. There's no indications that the Soviets, oh, sorry, that's a slip, the Russians are investing in any sort of large logistics trains or forward. There's a term. We used to were forgers. It's the ability to basically move forward rapidly all the necessary supplies, everything from guns to beans to medical units. Nothing indicates to me from any source I've seen is credible that the Russians are intending any greater incursion to the West. Am I missing something? I mean, because the
No, no,
Europeans keep saying,
the Russian way of war, and I go back to uh, some, you can kind of pick this all apart and go, and there's some fascinating characters who wrote about this, who wrote about the Russian way of war in the latter half of the Second World War, and what you see is exactly the same thing. Is that the Russian way of war is to literally grind forward very slowly, cause as many casualties as they can, and not worry about responding to any particular opportunity to the
right,
left or right. And
right,
and and so what you'll find is you've got this, and you've got an operation going on focused on town X, whatever the town is, doesn't matter.
yeah,
And all of a sudden something happens off to the east or off to the west. And people will comment, and I see these comments all the time. The Russians failed to understand blah blah blah, and they haven't moved on X on this town or that town. Well, it doesn't matter. People don't
they
understand
don't care.
what the Russians are doing. The
Yeah, they
Russians
don't
have,
care.
have come upon a very low risk of loss, low risk of losing the war, low risk of loss method of combat, and they are not going to respond quickly. There's not going to be, to those of you who know your World War II history, there's not going to be any mad dash Guderian slicing through the Ardennes or Rommel
No,
slicing up the coast. They're not. The Russians aren't interested in that. They're
yeah,
interested in the final result. The final result is they get a victory. And if that victory takes 3 years or 4 years, they don't care.
yeah.
And so
So
what you have here is this very slow grind, very, very, very much concentrated, not, by the way, on taking land, but more importantly, focused on inflicting casualties.
demilitarization.
They want to attrite the Ukrainian army, and they have been doing that. And then as it occurs, as that kind of thing takes place, they then move up in pieces of land. So,
Right.
for
So
example, it appears that they have the bulk of, if maybe all of 100% of Pokrovsk, the city of Pokrovsk, now under their control. They're squeezing Minograd, which is just to the east of
right.
Pokrovsk, of the Minograd, the Pokrovsk pocket, and they're squeezing the city of Huliaipol down whatever it is, 60 miles, 70 miles south of
Yeah.
Pokrovsk.
Right.
And they're squeezing these areas, and people look at it and say, well, why isn't this fast? Why? People look at the U.S. assault into Iraq in 2003 or into
Completely
Kuwait
different.
in 1991. And yeah, I mean, Tony, it is utterly different. It's like comparing football to hockey. It's a
Right.
different war. It's
Yeah.
completely different way of fighting. It's a
Yeah.
different way of war. And and so the Russians have come upon their own way of war, and they're doing it. And the problem here is here's the other side of this. People say, well, if we gave the Ukrainians X amount of assets, they could fight this fight a war like X, whatever you might want to think it. The problem is the Russians get a vote too. If the Ukrainians start doing a very aggressive, very large scale combat operations against the Russians will do what? The Russians would mobilize. The Russians get a vote. Now, what would be the result? Don't know what the result is. The future's unknown. Only God knows the future. But the fact of the matter is it's not going to be the same war, and the Russians are going to mobilize, and the Russians are going to respond, and the Russians have 5 times the population that the Ukrainians have.
I know. I've said this. So that's the bottom line. So to answer your own question, without outside forces being introduced into Ukraine, as to say, U.S. and NATO ground forces, Russia's just going to continue to do what it's doing, and there's no hope that it'll change in 18 months.
There is nothing that suggests a winning solution for Ukraine.
There's no military solution.
And it just isn't in the cards. Now, and I go back to, I have a couple of buddies of mine who are both real Soviet experts. They were retired intelligence officers. They were very, very deeply embedded in the Soviet problem. And I remember talking to these guys in 2021. And we called it in 20. I remember the discussion in vivid detail was the Russians aren't investing enough assets to really conquer this country if there's any resistance. And of course they didn't.
Right.
And then the war kind of get the whole 2022 mess. By the end of 2022, about the first week of December, I remember one of the guys saying very clearly, the Ukrainians need to sue for peace right now because they're
Exactly.
on the top. They're winning. They need to sue for peace. It's never going to get better. It hasn't.
Exactly.
It hasn't gotten any better since the first week of December 2022.
Yep.
And now here we are. We're 4 years. We're 4 years out from. I'm sorry, 3 years out from that event. In whatever it is, 10 days.
But Pete, let's be honest here. It's not the Ukrainians' fault. I feel the pain of the Ukrainian people. This is all about $360 billion, which have been injected into the country. There's no profit in peace. Nothing. That's why nobody except us knuckleheads are saying this is stupid. No, there's no military victory here. Tony. We're like saying, shut up. Be told, shut up. We're fighting the war.
Right. No, this is horribly sad. This is Ukraine being torn apart.
Exactly.
And it's just it just drives me right the wall.
My heart.
And I've got to say, the only guy on the whole flipping planet, actually, there's two people on this whole friggin' planet of prominence who are trying to bring about peace. The Pope and Donald Trump.
That's it.
One else. No one else.
We're on Trump's side on this, and I gotta walk. No, just for those who watch me, I gotta walk on eggshells on the air because I don't want to offend the neocons, which they still think somehow there's going to be a miracle. Just saying.
I mean, God bless Donald Trump because he's the only guy who's trying to bring peace in this whole friggin' mess.
I know.
I say a prayer for the poor bugger because he's getting squeezed every friggin' day. But he's the only guy. The only chance for peace here is Donald Trump.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, people who the left used to hate now look up to him. Ben Hodges is one of the guys who keeps saying, "Well, we just have to give him more time." And one of the ultimate, can I say the term in this context? Ben Arnold's. I just said his name earlier, the traitor.
Benedict
Arnold. Benedict Arnold is, and this is Petraeus, Dave Petraeus, like, oh no, they're doing fine. Just give them more stuff. It's like you have generals who have intellectually compromised themselves to the point of being essentially clowns. That's how bad this is.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely. It is that there's this idea that, for example, well, we'll give them one more weapon. We'll give them this. That there was a term of art here that originated in the Second World War of Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons.
Yeah, who used that term? A guy named Adolf Hitler.
right. And this idea that we're gonna give them a, fill in the blank, some weapon, and all of a sudden miraculously it's gonna give them victory. No, it's not. No,
Yeah.
it's not. It's just not gonna happen. And
So
and
I think, yeah, I think anybody who's been intellectually honest, which we try to do here in the Sentinel Circle and especially in the Senate debrief, there's no military solution to Ukraine.
not for
If
the Ukrainians, not for the
no,
Ukrainians.
no,
And it's just this
and
horribly sad situation,
yeah,
and the country is being torn apart, and the people are being torn apart, and
and God help those people who have made profit off this.
yeah,
We
I
have
mean,
proudly not. We didn't engage, but I'm saying others have made billions off this, and
billions
they're
of dollars.
estimating, Pete, they're estimating that only get this, only 15% of the 360 billion went to corruption. It's like, really? How many billions is that?
Yeah, I mean, think about that. Think about that. Only 15%.
Only,
Only
only. So
15%.
this is when there was Smedley Butler said war is a racket. This is what he was talking
Yeah,
about. This is a racket.
15%, by the way, is $54 billion for those you can't
Yeah,
add. At $54 billion.
unbelievable. And that's the official U.S. government estimate. Well, it's only 15%. Okay. Yeah, I don't believe that for a minute, but if you want
Yeah,
to
but
start
let's
at
just say
15,
it's accurate. 54 billion.